step over the gap between the train and the platform.
After extensively using this camera for about 2 years, this is my honest review about Canon EOS R3 and my personal opinion that whether you should invest in a Canon R3 in 2024, especially after knowing the fact that a Canon R5 Mark II is in the pipeline and soon going to be announced in February 2024.
And there are some basic standard of features which I personally look forward to in every camera, especially as of 2024, because these features have become the new standardized norm or the new foundational features in every camera, irrespective of the fact whether it is an entry-level camera or a mid-segment camera like Canon R8, A7 IV, and especially cameras who actually ranges between $1,000 to $2,000, which is actually quite affordable for most of the people. The features which I look forward to are: first, it should have 4K 60 without any crop, and even if there is any crop, it should be super minimal, not significant. It should have log with 10-bit. It should have dual SD card slot. It should be a full frame camera, probably. It shouldn't overheat as obviously. It shouldn't have any recording limit, and it should have a decent autofocusing system. But these are not the only features which I look forward to in this camera before investing in it, because I obviously expected these features to be present in the camera, especially with the price point this camera has. But even for a second, if I keep these features aside, what makes Canon R3 almost a flagship camera? So there are 5 things which I'm going to discuss about this camera which makes this camera worth it, and 5 things which I don't like about this camera. So number 1, this camera has a back illuminated sensor. Now what is actually the function of a back illuminated sensor? And that is, it helps in signal to noise ratio. In super layman terms, it helps in getting low light pictures as well as reducing noise. So this camera, Canon R3, can actually get some crisp pictures even in low light, and you can push your ISO above or up to 20,000. Now the marketing of this camera when this video was released on YouTube says that you can push it up to 1 lakh. Now I haven't pushed it up to 1 lakh, but they have marketed it that you can push it up to that limit. So this is one of the groundbreaking or USP of this camera, and honestly when I used this camera I also felt that yes, the pictures were quite crisp and quite amazing, and even in low light I did not face any or did not see any apparent or significant noise in the pictures. Point number 2, this camera has an amazing autofocusing system, and yes, I'm saying this even in 2024, especially after seeing Sony A9 III. I know that I don't know whether that camera has been in the market. I haven't used that camera personally, but when Canon R5 was released in 2020, that camera came with an amazing autofocusing system. That camera has an option to enable head tracking, so you can enable head tracking and the camera is going to specially track your head movements and everything, so it is in focus. But what makes the Canon R3's autofocusing system stand out or different from rest of the camera is that the head tracking feature is already enabled in all the options of the camera. So you don't need to specifically go in the options, turn it on. So probably this means that you're not going to miss your shots either in video or photos. And even after that you miss some shots, then number 3, this camera has AI autofocus, and it is quite amazing and fun to play around. So when you're going to look in the viewfinder, your iris is going to be tracked, and wherever you're going to look at, that subject is going to be in focus. Now I cannot demonstrate that feature even in videos, and you can see that feature only in the marketing video of Canon when the Canon R3 was released, and I'm going to play it right now.
So wherever you're going to look at, that subject is going to be in the focus. Now this feature does also have a drawback and limitation, which I'm going to come at in the limitations or the drawbacks of this camera. Number 4. This camera has some groundbreaking video specs, and you don't see these type of video specs in any camera as of today. This camera has 6K RAW and 60 frames per second and 4K 120 all internally. And this camera can take this toll easily because no one is going to record 6K RAW 60 frames per second for about an hour or maybe 2 hours. No. Yes, this camera is going to overheat, but you're not going to use these features for a very long time. Now this also comes up with certain limitations, which I'm going to discuss about in the limitations part. But if you ask me about the usability, this is an amazing feature, because otherwise for other cameras you need to specially buy a monitor to use these features. Yes, the 6K RAW doesn't have that amazing dynamic range which you get out of cinema cameras, but you are getting better dynamic range in comparison to C-Log 3, and you are doing all this internally, which you won't be able to do with any other cameras. So this is an amazing camera. And yes, apart from Canon R5, which can do 8K RAW, and that is just... And now coming to the 5th and final point of this camera, and that is this camera is a beast in terms of speed. And the reason why I say this, because of its sensor. I know I've already talked about the sensor, but because of its sensor you get blackout free pictures, because this camera can record in 30 frames per second electronically and 12 frames per second mechanically. I know I personally don't care about the flickering effect which we get when we are taking pictures electronically in burst mode. I honestly personally don't care about it, but many people do. It never bothered my workflow previously, and right now I have this feature, so I don't miss out any shots. It can also record videos and take pictures without any rolling shutter. The rolling shutter is actually minimal. You won't going to see, because of its sensor, any rolling shutter in the pictures. It's going to be super minimal. Now coming to 5 things which I don't like about this camera. Number 1, I know many of you are going to say that this camera, and some of you who have actually held this camera and used this camera, you're going to compare it with obviously 1DX Mark series of Canon. And yes, it is somewhat an upgrade or a mirrorless version of 1DX Mark series, and 1DX cameras were super chunky and heavy. If you're using this camera continuously and you're using it as a run and gun camera, this camera does feel a little chunky and uncomfortable to use because of its size and form factor. Now this can also be a plus point for many people, because I also personally like to use cameras with an amazing grip. Second thing which I don't like about this camera is the placement of its power button. I know it's a very minuscule and very meticulous thing, but I prefer the placement of the power button on the top of the cameras rather than on the back of the camera, because every time if I need to switch on or off the camera because of any reason, I need to place my hand right at the back and look where the button is. Now I figured it out after using it for a while. Now my muscle memory knows where the button is, but in the beginning I faced a lot of problem in figuring out where the camera button is. So even today I prefer cameras which has a power button on the top, so I can easily switch it off and off. Now coming to the point number 3, which I don't like about this camera, and that is somewhat related to the point number 1. This camera has some trouble, or I always come across some problem fitting this camera in a small camera body. Now the camera bag which I use is a pneumatic Peter McKinnon version 2. And I find it a little annoying sometimes fitting this camera in the camera bag. I know it's a very minor thing, but it's a thing which I considered in the long run, because some of these points you're going to realize when you're going to extensively use this camera for a long run, and you're going to find out that yes, these are some of the things which you're getting trouble with, or which are becoming a hindrance in your workflow, or fast workflow. Coming to the point number 4, and that is related to the point which I mentioned the AI autofocus. Now the problem which I have with AI autofocus is its usability. Now if you are at a place where you know you are going to be at that place and you are just stationary there, it is a very useful feature. The lighting is not going to be changed. You're there, you're going to just follow the subject wherever you're moving your eye. It's an amazing feature. But if you are continuously moving around within that same vicinity or to a different place, then you need to recalibrate it every time, which is quite an annoying process unless you have a buffer or a time gap of 10 minutes where you know that every time you can recalibrate it, then that's not an issue for you. But sometimes in some situations you cannot recalibrate it in every time, and I know at those instances you can just use your normal autofocus because this camera's autofocus is already pretty amazing. And the fifth and then final point which I don't like about this camera is basically related to the codecs. So because this camera has some amazing video features, the codecs are quite heavy on your laptop or your operating system, whichever you're using, unless you have an Apple Silicon computer. And nowadays most of the people are switching to Apple Silicon. So 2 years ago there weren't many options. Now we have M3, M2, though 2 years ago also we had M1, but still for some people who have 2018 or 2017 models of laptop or iMacs and everything, if you're still using that system, then it is going to be a little problem for you to play back these videos smoothly in Premiere. And we know the infamous Premiere, how many times it crashes. So yes, you need to upgrade your system and you need to consider the cost of operating system or these laptops also, because in order to smoothly function and use your camera, you need some amazing specs in your laptop or computer. This brings me to the question, who should actually buy this camera in 2024? So if you're someone who likes to do a lot of slow motion stuff like 4K 120 and cares about the resolution in videos like 6K RAW at 60 frames per second, and you want all these features to be jam-packed in one camera body itself, and you don't want to invest in any other accessory or any other monitor, and you like to do a lot of fast-paced photography like wildlife photography, sports photography, then this camera is the perfect camera for you because it can do amazing photos as well as amazing videos. It's a perfect hybrid for a person who thinks that they want to do it for the next 4-5 years or maybe next 3-4 years. So this is an absolute beast, an amazing investment for you guys. But if you're someone who likes to do dedicatedly only photos and who wants to do cinematic video, like who wants to make documentaries for cinema like for the Netflix, or they want to do dedicatedly videos only, then this camera is not for you because of its price point. This camera costs around nearly 5 grand, and when it was released it costed near 6 grand. But now after 2 years the price has dropped by $500 or $600. So that's it guys, this was the video. I hope you really like it, and at the end I will also suggest you to actually wait for few months, like till February or middle of the February or by the end of February, because Canon is soon going to make an announcement of R5 Mark II. Till then, take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next video. Namaste and thank you for watching.